Hi, my name is Robert Dedman from King & Spalding, and my one big thing for Incident Response Forum Europe 2020 is for firms in the financial services industry. A data breach for you will always involve multiple regulators being interested in what happened. The FCA and, if you're dual regulated, the PRA will be at least as interested in the data breach as the Information Commissioner's Office. So make sure that you plan to involve those regulators in your discussions around the causes of the breach and your response to it. You should expect to have conversations with them not only about consumer detriment, but also about systems and controls and policies and procedures.
Welcome back, everyone, and I hope you've stuck with us. We have a terrific spotlight, which is the third of our 4 spotlights today, and this one is on the NCSC, the National Cybersecurity Center, and it's entitled Assessing the Cyber Threat. What is the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre? It's an organization of the UK that provides advice and support for the public and private sector on how to avoid computer security threats, and was formed in 2016. When incidents do occur, they provide effective incident response to minimize harm to the UK, help with recovery, and learn lessons for the future. There's a bit of cloak and dagger to it all at the NCSC, as some equate it to the American NSA. And our speaker, who we will call Harry, and whose picture you will not see, is not because of a technical difficulty. It's because it's their policy not to show photographs. But Harry has been involved in cybersecurity since before it was known as cyber. He spent over a decade testing the security of government and critical national infrastructure, and is a technical director at the NCSC Incident Management Team. And who better to moderate this than Rosemarie Paul from Ropes and Gray, who's a partner there in the UK. Oh, well, I should say first, welcome, Harry.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. And so Rosemarie Paul. Rosemarie specializes in UK financial regulatory matters with a particular focus on regulatory investigation and enforcement proceedings with the Financial Conduct Authority, formerly the FSA, and the Prudential Regulation Authority. And she also, obviously, because of this job, has become an expert on cyber, because that's become such a big area for financial services. She was a member of the Enforcement and Financial Crime Department at the FSA, before it was the FCA, where she provided legal advice to the investigatory teams within the Enforcement Division and led cases through the Decision Committee and upper tribunal hearings. There is a lot to admire about Rosemarie. She is also actively involved in pro bono projects with Lawyers Without Borders, and she conducted an advocacy training program in Kenya for prosecutors, magistrates, and wildlife service officers, and became involved in educational programs about human trafficking in Africa. Just so wonderful to have Rosemarie. She's in London right now. I'm going to hand it over to you, Rosemarie. Welcome, and have a great session.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for dialing in. And hi to Harry. Thank you very much for joining us. Harry, John has really helpfully set out a bit of the background to the National Cybersecurity Centre, but I think it would be really helpful if you could provide a bit more detail about what the role of the NCSC is and what its scope is.
Absolutely, yeah, happy to do that. Fundamentally, we were formed out of a number of different organisations across the UK, mostly because there were complaints at the time from kind of politicians that there was a bit of a kind of alphabet soup of who was actually the part of government that they needed to turn to ask about cybersecurity. And so we were kind of pulled together from multiple different agencies. So our remit is exceptionally broad. Our tagline is making the UK the safest place to live and work online. So it's everything from helping to ensure that citizens are safe from cyber attack, through to helping with critical national infrastructure and government systems. So we've got a very, very broad remit. And yeah, we do everything from helping to encourage more women into cybersecurity, through to my particular area, which is dealing with major cyber incidents that affect the UK, and trying to ensure that the harm that they cause is as minimal as possible.
Thank you, Harry. It's really a fascinating sort of department in so many ways, because it's part of GCHQ, which again, as was mentioned before, is sort of seen as the equivalent to the US NSA. Can you just tell us a bit about how you operate as the public-facing part of that?
Absolutely, it's been very interesting with the kind of the shift over the kind of 13 years that I've been in government. You know, we're much more public facing now. Many more of our senior staff, you know, have public profiles. You know, our CEO regularly appears on the news. We have a media suite in our office in London where we regularly get reporters in. You know, we're trying as much as possible to be as public facing as possible, because it's, you know, it's really important to us to be able to get our name out there. It's particularly important for me in the incident management space, because one of the main things that we do is to actually work as a kind of clearinghouse for notifications to organisations to let them know that, you know, we've had word that something bad has happened to them. And it's a lot easier for us if people have actually heard of the National Cybersecurity Centre when we reach out to them. Otherwise, we have a slight tendency for them to think that we might be trying to scam them. So it's much better if people have actually heard of us. So we work really hard to kind of make sure that our you know, we're getting out there, talking to people, and being as open as we possibly can, open and transparent about what we do.
So Harry, we know that the NCSC is a government department. Does that mean that you're a regulator? Do you bring enforcement action?
We absolutely are not a regulator. It's a very important part of our role. Is that we aren't a regulator. We have no duty to report to regulators. You know, our position is that we're here to assist in cyber incidents, and therefore, you know, information that's shared with us by victims of cyber attacks, we don't share that on to regulators. It causes some quite complicated situations for us. But, you know, basically, if we were to share information to regulators, we know that people would stop telling us about the incidents, and we wouldn't be able to have kind of the open exchange of information with them that is necessary to actually, you know, help with incidents in particular, you know, being my area.
So Harry, tell us how you help with incidents. So in terms of industry, having a government department that they can reach out to is and seek support from. Tell us, can you walk us through that relationship?
Absolutely. So yeah, we've got we have no statutory footing, so you don't have to come and talk to us. So we have to work very hard to try and encourage people to come and talk to us, you know, and therefore make sure that we've got, you know, a good sales pitch for it. The kind of key things that we can do are in some of the technical aspects of incidents, things like helping with understanding, you know, what the next steps might be in an attack, or you know, advising on where to go for further advice. You know, which companies we've accredited as being particularly good in cybersecurity response, for example. We also do a lot of work simply kind of corralling the government side of response. So if you have a major incident and you are, you know, a really significant organisation affecting UK citizens, it is entirely possible that lots of bits of government will have some questions to ask. And so one of the important things we do for really big incidents is act as that kind of single point of entry, so that you're not being bombarded on every side by people asking questions about what's going on. You know, everything filters through us, and we can go and answer questions back to the rest of government. You know, we don't need to. You don't need to kind of, you know, have multiple things there. Some of the things we can do, you know, even kind of more tactically, are things like advising on kind of good comms lines. Our comms team are very experienced in dealing with incidents. So, you know, a bit of advice on comms lines, even just making sure that our comms lines are aligned with whatever comms lines the organisation who's been affected is going to have, so that, you know, we're very regularly the first port of call for a lot of journalists, and it's always useful to make sure that we're saying the same thing that you're saying when something bad happens.
So Harry, do you how do you deal with the incidents? I'm a major institution. I've had a ransomware attack. I call the NCSC. What can I expect to happen?
So if you get in touch with us, well, ransomware attacks are a particularly interesting case in that fundamentally all of the bad things have happened by the point at which you've had your ransomware attack. You know, if we compare it to a kind of, you know, a fire brigade, you know, call out, you know, the building is burnt down at the point at which the ransomware has happened. So ideally, you would get in touch with us earlier than that, when you know, maybe your intrusion detection system detects some unusual activity or something like that. But if it's at that kind of late stage, the sorts of things we can do are, like I say, help to kind of corral the response, help to link you up with the right people to help with the the recovery process, ensure that all of the correct people across government are linked in with you, etc. What we can't do is go and is go and share your information to regulators, but we can help to kind of work on your side to talk to the rest of government to make sure that people know what's going on. We have in some cases gone and spoken to regulators to help them understand, with the permission of the organisation that's been affected, details that maybe were difficult for the regulator to understand, things like that. But yeah, there's a whole range of different capabilities that can bring to bear. Like I say, ransomware is a particularly difficult situation because fundamentally at that point you're looking at how do you recover from this. In the sorts of cases where you've caught it earlier, we can help with things like what's the likely next step in this attack? Is there any other information that might help me detect more of this before it gets worse and becomes ransomware, etc.
Oh, it's interesting. You've described the interaction and the interface that you can provide with government. Do you interface directly with law enforcement as well, or is that separate?
No, absolutely. So we also, so again, there's no, if you come and talk to the NCSC, we can be an interface into law enforcement, but we don't have to be. So that's an important point for us to put out, because again, we're aware that some organisations are nervous about exactly how they engage with law enforcement. But we have very good relationships across the law enforcement space in the UK and beyond, in fact, and therefore can help to engage with law enforcement, can help to kind of align law enforcement with the needs of the victim. Fundamentally, the way it breaks down is that NCSC's interest is supporting the victim, and therefore, often if law enforcement is looking at kind of pursuing law enforcement outcomes, we can be focusing on actually can we help the victim get back up and running as quickly as possible.
I see. And in terms of sort of that interface with governments, how do you interface with sort of foreign authorities? Do you interface with the US authorities?
We have a lot of contacts with different parts of the US in the kind of cybersecurity space. It's an interesting position for us because, like I say, we're a fairly coherent. There's just one NCSC in the UK, and we have most of the cybersecurity functionality in the UK works for us. It's a slightly more distributed system in the US, but we have relationships with a vast range of entities, from kind of DHS and CISA through the FBI, through various other organisations in the US. And we work very closely with them on a number of major incidents.
So it sounds like an amazing service, but you mentioned that you need to encourage industry to sort of come to you with cyber incidents. What do you think inhibits people from contacting the NCSC?
So I suspect that the two things are, and the reason why I've been hammering on it as much as possible, the two things that prohibit, that kind of stop people from coming to us are, one, a concern that we might share their information either with regulators or just leak it somehow. I mean, I've said I've said multiple times already how we don't talk to regulators without the permission of the victim organisation. The other side, you can't see my face and I don't have a proper surname because I come from an intelligence background. We're very good at keeping secrets, so you don't need to worry so much about that side of things. I think it's also just difficulties around understanding what exactly you're going to get when you come to us, and it's an area that we're working on. It's kind of ensuring that we've really spelt out those selling points of what is the service you will get from us. We've done a lot of work on trying to reduce that, trying to explain the message of reducing the negatives, but I think we need to concentrate a lot on the kind of the positive side of why you should come and engage with NCSC, what we can do to help you.
And so can you tell us a bit more about the monitoring the NCSC undertake? You mentioned that it's not just a matter of industry reaching out to you, but sometimes you might proactively reach out to an industry player because you're aware of a threat. How does that work?
So, well, fundamentally, it acts like a clearinghouse. We have relationships with national certs and other agencies all around the world, and also with large parts of the cybersecurity sector. We have lots of connections in the UK. with cybersecurity organizations. We have a scheme called Industry 100 where we have embeds from lots of different parts of industry within the NCSC, and therefore what often happens is that somebody has got, I don't know, a sinkhole for a particular strand of malware, so they're seeing connections into what would be to the control system for that strand of malware, and they can see where those connections are coming from, but they then don't know who that is, so they'll come to us and we can then do the work to figure out who we should go to say, you've got Qbot or TrickBot or Emotet or whatever malware on your systems, and you need to clean this up because it could easily become ransomware in the future. It's quite a challenging space, that, because finding out which organization owns a particular IP address is non-trivial, but B, the hardest part really for us is actually getting to speak to somebody who can do something about it. I've regularly commented that traditionally intelligence agencies didn't recruit for telesales skills, so we're not that brilliant on the telephone. When we ring up an organization and say, hi, can I talk to someone in charge of cybersecurity, we tend to get turned away as a salesperson rather than immediately put through to the security operations team. So we run a load of outreach and some services. We've got a service that we run called the Early Warning Service, where you can sign up and basically you tell us what IP addresses belong to you, and in return we make sure that we send through as quickly as possible any notifications we get of any malicious activity that may be affecting those.
No, it's interesting. I mean, Harry, you've been working in this area for a number of years. From your perspective, in terms of the work you do with the NCSC, what has been the biggest change you've observed in terms of cybersecurity, cyber threat?
I mean, over the years that I've been doing this, just simply the fact that cybersecurity has become such a much bigger part of kind of high-level discussions. When I first started out, the best part of 20 years ago, this was not a topic that appeared at board level. It's now distinctly becoming something that we regularly talk to board level people about. In the kind of shorter term, though, the biggest thing we've probably seen in the last couple of years is this big pivot by cyber criminals to ransomware attacks as a way of monetizing hacking companies. And the uptick in ransomware is definitely very, very substantial, that we're seeing targeted attacks on organizations with actual hackers behind them who, once they get in, they deploy this ransomware in order to monetize it. And I think it's going to really drive people, it's driving the attackers through the fact that they've worked out this great way to monetize the attacks, to actually do more attacks. It used to be hard to make money out of hacking a company because, if you tried to steal banking details, then the banks had quite good fraud teams. If you tried to steal intellectual property, you had to figure out what to do with that and how to make money out of it. Whereas with ransomware, it's very straightforward. Get on somebody's network, deploy ransomware, encrypt all of their stuff, and then charge them money to get their systems back up and running. And that's a massive, massive upswing in the last couple of years.
Are you able to give us any sort of indication of how long it takes to resolve an issue such as ransomware? I certainly know that a lot of firms may just pay the ransom because in the UK that's not an offence, just to get their systems up and running. I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
So I mean, we've definitely been involved in cases where victims have paid the ransom. We would much rather that victims didn't. A lot of our advice to organisations is around making sure you've got good backup systems so that you can restore your system, your data, because obviously we'd much rather that people didn't pay ransoms. It's been interesting in cases where people have paid ransoms. It doesn't dramatically speed up the recovery in a lot of cases. If you have backups that you could restore, actually it takes quite a long time. Even if you've decrypted all of your software, all of your data with having paid your ransom, actually making all of your systems talk to each other again, some of your systems will not like having been rather dramatically shut down. Your database that was running perfectly happily, if suddenly the files underneath it all get encrypted whilst it's still running, it causes all kinds of issues. So there's certainly, I think the average from some industry reporting is about 16 days of downtime for a major ransomware attack. But we've certainly had cases where it's taken organizations much longer than that. And in some cases where the victim hasn't paid the ransom, they just simply haven't been able to recover the data, and they've lost, multiple years worth of data just through these sorts of attacks.
Harry, in your experience, what's been the most interesting cyber incident that you've had to deal with? The sort of one that you'd use for a dinner table conversation?
So I don't know whether it's necessarily the cyber side that is the most interesting part for me. The most interesting part for me has been seeing the kind of the bits that I didn't expect. So from a cyber perspective, for example, there's a few that are interesting, but the more interesting part of things, like, it's been fascinating for me with a background in hacking computer systems, doing penetration testing. I always used to talk about how important it was to have good records of your IT assets so that you knew which ones belonged to you and you knew that they'd been patched, etc. The interesting things that I've seen are now the kind of asset management, a level way above that, where we've had instances with large companies who haven't known where all their offices are, or haven't known how many subsidiaries they've got, or didn't realize that they didn't actually own that subsidiary wholly and therefore couldn't tell them what to do, or had forgotten that they had sold that subsidiary but they hadn't actually severed the internet connection, the network connection between them. So some of those pieces, the macro scale of some of the cyber incidents that I've been involved in, I think are really interesting, about how actually it's not necessarily down in the kind of ones and zeros. Actually, a lot of the incident response is really up at a much higher level, and some of those have been fascinating. There's a particularly complicated one we're involved in that involved a company that had just gone through a demerger and had split into two companies, but hadn't separated their IT at all. And one was now a French headquartered company, and one was now a UK headquartered company. And the complexities of dealing with unpicking all of that was that was very interesting to me.
Harry, we've got a few minutes left. I think it'd be really interesting and helpful to hear what you see as the sort of top tips for industry. And I know that we've got a huge mix of sort of industry here, from financial services to other areas. What do you think industry should be keeping an eye out for? What do you think they should be doing? And what are the trends that you're seeing that you think we should be aware of?
I mean, I think I've already mentioned ransomware. I think it's the biggest issue that is going to be affecting organizations for the foreseeable future. And so, the number one important thing is to make sure that you have good backups, that they're stored somewhere sensible that the attackers can't get to, and that you are confident you can restore from them is incredibly important. But then the other issues, we try very hard not to refer to them in NCSE as basics. We're looking at, we talk about them as being kind of foundational issues within cybersecurity, but things like, patching, having good passwords, all of these things that everyone has talked about for years. Companies still have great trouble with these. It's a big challenge across the whole industry.
Why do you think that is a challenge? That sounds like something relatively straightforward that should be part of day-to-day business. So
it sounds like it. I think some of it is a kind of lack of investment over a long time in it. So things like knowing what computers you have, so that you know that you've patched all of them. Lots of organisations have grown organically over many years. They've grown through merger and acquisition. They've not got particularly brilliant records of where everything is and how it all plugs together, and therefore just doing some of these things is actually a lot more difficult than it initially sounds. It sounds trivial to say patch all of your IT, but then when you get into the weeds of you're a massive company, you've had infinite numbers of mergers and acquisitions. How many computers do you actually have, and are you confident you know that for certain? And then going through all of the process of moving off legacy out-of-date systems, but the cost that's involved in shifting some of these things is very dramatic. So there's just a lot of things in here which are probably down to just kind of natural things that have happened over time, where cybersecurity hasn't been a major focus of organizations, and so people are kind of paying back that technical debt now, and it's very difficult in a large complex environment where the company's been going for 20, 30 years with computers to now actually reverse engineer some of these things out and kind of unpick things. is a dramatic challenge for lots of organizations.
Yeah, I think that's right. Harry, I could talk to you all day about this. I think it's fascinating. I'm certainly going to quote you on paying back your technical debt, which I think is a terrific way of describing the deficit we see here. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us today. And on that note, I'm going to hand back to Bruce.
Thank you, Rosemarie. That was terrific. And Harry, thank you to you and to the National Cybersecurity Center for sharing your insights and your perspectives. It was really helpful and really interesting. Our next panel is on national security and incident response, and that begins at 5:40 BST. So I hope everybody will join us in 10 minutes. Thank you.